Hello and welcome to another episode of Speculative Speculations. I'm Varsha.
I'm Chris.
I'm Jared.
Steve.
And I'm Dan.
And this is a sci-fi series, where we talk about sci-fi stories in all their forms. Today we're going to be starting Embassytown by China Mieville. We usually work through whatever book we pick at approximately 100 pages or slightly less than that to talk about per week. So today we're discussing to the end of part 1, which brings us to, I believe, 80 something pages in the US edition and 104 pages in the UK edition. The short story for today is The Fate of Poseidonia by Clare Winger Harris. We also do short stories for every week. So the short story for next week will be The Star Stealers by Edmund Hamilton. And we're going to be reading to the end of part 3 in Embassytown for next week. So first impressions of Embassytown.
I'm really glad that Dan kind of gave us a heads up because I didn't read the synopsis or anything. I just went into it, and I'm glad that I had like an idea because the way he described it it's kind of like Gardens of the Moon. It kind of just drops you in and doesn't really give you a whole lot of anything. Just kind of like, here you go. So yeah, knowing that really helps me. Otherwise, I'd be much more confused than I was.
Wondering if you're supposed to understand things and you're just being dumb.
Yeah, that happens like every day. So I'd just be like, oh, it's Tuesday. But I knew that, okay, I'm not supposed to know. So I felt better about being dumb.
Yeah.
Tuesdays are rough.
But
any day ending in one.
Yeah. Some of the stuff like that you don't know at the beginning, like it's already starting to get slowly explained. Like at the beginning when they're talking about the hosts and their language, you're like, I don't know anything about what's going on. And now you're getting a bit. It still took a while for me to understand, like the fundamentals of a language. Like, what does it mean that they have to have like meaning behind the words and stuff like that? Like, I still was having a hard time understanding for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But slowly getting into it.
Now, Dan, have you read this before?
No.
Oh, okay. All right, good. All right.
I have no clue what's going on.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was searching for clues in your.
No, don't.
But I'll stop doing that. Yeah. No, I liked it. So far so good. It's China Mieville. He definitely has that distinct style. That I can, it has that same feel of his writing because from when I read Perdido Street Station and it's, but still he's trying to do something different than what he's done before. So, kudos to him for actually tackling such a concept as language. It seems to be his main thing that he wants to look at here, and especially alien language from an alien species, where he's making his species extremely alien. Like it's not like Star Trek where you run into some other guy with pointy ears who can speak to you right back. It's a very, very alien, but we also have his telltale fascination with bugs, so that's creeping into the story. With all that taking into account, you get a good feel for what he's going to be getting you into, but of course he's still keeping a lot from you to unravel as the story seems to go on here.
Yeah, it definitely has a feeling of like first Mieville book for me, but I'm going to respect the reader to kind of go with me. A lot of things. So there's a lot of vocabulary that to us doesn't make any sense to the reader at this stage. So a lot of terms used, sometimes 2 or 3 per sentence in some ways, and you kind of go, right, I can't worry about it because there's no way. As I was saying to Dan very quick before we started, like there's no glossary in it. So in some ways, if he wanted you to understand it, he would have given you a glossary for it. But otherwise, you're just kind of getting dropped into the world to kind of say, look, go with it. I'm introducing some of the language, hopefully, so that we fill it in. And then you have these events that happen, like with Brian at the start, when he's the record holder, the second best, if you know what I mean. What were they doing? They still don't really know what it was they were doing. And he even goes back to revisit the site and all of that kind of stuff. And all of that, because we don't know any of that. And obviously, I think that'll form a lot of the part. As soon as we know that, that'll make sense of some of the other stuff that's happened, even about the establishment of Embassytown in its own right as a colony. None of that's kind of given to us, really, apart from a rough outline of kind of where it was established and why they were sort of doing it from the outset, but actually how were people picked, or what race were they picked from, and all of that kind of stuff when they go out. And then all of this other stuff, like immersers, like told that he's an immerser, and we get a rough explanation of what an immerser does. But again, I'm sitting reading it going, but why is that useful? You know what I mean? They could just go into cryo sleep or something to sort of infer that for an awful lot of people. Why is it useful? Why is he being respected for it? So there's all of these, again, not quite the same level of a Vandermeer puzzle box, but this idea that there's a lot still to find out about the world. There's a lot of machinations, and even how society works in a lot of ways to find out.
Yeah, and a lot of that is just like flavor, like world building flavor. Like most of it is not going to be necessary for the plot. It just, you read this sentence with this couple of one-off, descriptions of how weddings work in relationships work in this universe, and you're like, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. Or like, the fact that they're married, but it's a non-physical wedding, which is very interesting thing. I mean, it maybe will not have anything to do with it. Maybe it will, because now we're having, he's having an affair. Well, it's not an affair. He's having a physical relationship with the two other people, or the one other person. So maybe it will have some meaning, but it doesn't have to. Just a very interesting thing. Or like the fact I found really inventive, I guess, when she mentions about the Immer that was always there, but then this is the third universe. It's like, how do they know? For one, but it's like also interesting that it's like, again, it's been 3 different universes that have been destroyed and recreated, but these lighthouses were made by someone we don't know. Will we ever know? Who knows? In the Immer, we don't know. It just, everything feels very as if we're seeing a real world, right? There's so many little details of something you would mention, like reading a normal book, you would see all these mentions of things which are normal. But if you're doing a fancy book, you would probably skip it because you don't want to do all the world building, and you also, or maybe it would just sound like normal because you wouldn't have that much of an imagination to put all these weird things. But he just puts them in, and it makes everything feel so much more real.
Yeah. Well, he's doing that for a purpose too, because it's told in first person. So if you're sitting there talking to somebody and they're telling you a story and they're telling you about their life, and they're going to assume you know certain things about their world and what they're talking about. And that's how the story through the character is getting related to us. And that's why Mieville's throwing those terms at us, because he's almost treating us like we would be familiar with this stuff already, and that character wouldn't stop and explain themselves every time they were talking about their world and their terms, just like I wouldn't stop and explain Boston to you guys in detail every time I talk about Boston or Massachusetts. There's just certain things that you just keep going when you're telling a story and you're talking about it. And so that's kind of what Mieville's given us with this character's point of view.
And when we get the explanations, they come out very organically. They're more like, it's like we don't really wonder about here in Embassytown. We don't ask about these things, or the founding, it doesn't matter, or the fact that he doesn't know much about the Immer and he's interested in it. So then she gets to explain things, right? But it feels very organic. It doesn't sound like an exposition. You get like little bits at a time.
Yeah, and like different characters have different varying levels of ignorance about different things. So then the author gets to tell us about whatever it is that those characters are finding out about. Yeah, I agree. I think it's all very cleverly done. One particular thing that I highlighted, like just as an example of this, was when she tells us, I was taken there in a corvid, my first flight. So we find out that corvids are things that they fly in without being told, like, this is an aircraft. Corvids are aircrafts. P.S. Here's a glossary term for you. So yeah, I think overall I thought this was like a really imaginative book. I think I wrote on the forum that like 15 pages in, I'm already in love with it. I think that was about the time we meet Immer and the three universes, and well, lighthouses come way later. But I think the three universes really stood out to me as super interesting. It may not play a role in the story at all, but as a world building aspect, I just love how imaginative that is. And if you think about it, it might even be not obvious, but like something that could be true of our world, like almost. So I can see why this would be a nice sci-fi book to read. And I love the bio rigging that apparently they come out of throats, which again, like it's strange, just like borderline being difficult to read, but it's all very interesting and imaginative nevertheless. Did anyone else think that, for those of you who have read The Story of Your Life, that the language of the hosts felt a little like, almost like the opposite of the language that of the aliens in The Story of Your Life or the movie Arrival? Because those aliens can write the future, and these aliens can't speak something unless it has happened or unless it is true, which felt like a nice, not parallel, but like just an interesting thing to compare here. Like they're both immensely imaginative in my opinion, but just yeah, they are different but also somewhat similar, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the final part with it, the Festival of Lies, was really
Yeah.
like it's just those things that you don't imagine until he describes them, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense,
Yeah.
and it's really fun thing to have, right? And it's like, but yeah, also, how did they manage to build a civilization without being able to? Like, how can you be creative without being able to imagine something that doesn't exist or read? I don't know. Very hard. I think he does say it's like really hard. And like the scientists were also wondering how they advance and all those things, but it's, I don't know, hard to imagine.
But we also don't know the function of the hosts. I mean, we are sort of assuming that they're a single race at the moment, but they could sort of be assimilating other parts into their being over the function of time, if you know what I mean, into their existence. Because if you kind of think about it, the idea of the ambassador is that the ambassadors are being and sort of bred, but in this, as we find out, sort of designed to morph into the hosts to communicate with them. So in some ways, the ambassadors are assimilating themselves into the host kind of world in its own right. And maybe at a certain point, you don't see the difference between that or otherwise. So we don't really know enough about how the world functioned before the story. How it was set up to make some sort of definitive guess as to what's doing that. I do think it's worth pointing out, if anybody's kind of following along, unless it's otherwise said, I don't think I found the first 100 pages this easy to read. It certainly didn't flow by any imagination. It was, and I wouldn't have called it a slog because I kind of did it in small chunks. I kind of did to the point where I felt I had kind of like a cognitive load and went, I'll put it down now and then come back tomorrow. So it was about 30 pages or so, because there's quite a lot in the 30 pages to kind of go, right. I mean, I'm not sure really understand anything, but I get the information and the vocabulary and stuff that's happening there, and I sort of see how some of it fits together. And then it came along the next day and it would take it on a little bit further. So if you're following along and you thought, God, I found a bit of a struggle to get through because I couldn't connect the pieces together, I think that's intentional, and I think I certainly felt that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Chris. I did also read it in smaller chunks, but what I found was that I really looked forward to picking it up again, not immediately, but I was thinking about it a lot between reads. But I also found that I read larger chunks each time. I think my last chunk was 50 pages, so I did the last 3 chapters all together. But yeah, it is. I'm expecting that the rest of the book might be somewhat easy to read. In terms of like, Burrito Street Station is the only other book I have read by Mieville, but I think that one for me didn't make things quite so difficult to follow along about like what's going on. In my opinion, it was just there was some weirdnesses there. Like the opening chapter has a bug person, which is interesting. There's some things that are difficult to wrap your head around, but not difficult to read, I think. But this one was, I agree. It is, you have to like really pay attention, take it slowly and then like map it back to terms that you've heard before. And I think I went back to the preface, prologue, whatever it was, several times to see what was going on, what the event was, what they were looking forward to. Yeah.
Yeah, he uses a lot of new invented terminology that that does take getting used to in the first, like you said, the first 30 pages. So I think that's part of what slows you down, is because you're like, is that a word, or is that something he just made up to be a word for this civilization? And so I have a feeling that once we are more used to those terms and stuff like that, as the time goes on, hopefully the book will flow a little smoother, because we're not stopping mentally and going, wait, is that a word? And trying to actually put that word into context, stopping to put it into context and saying, all right, this, I think it means this, or it means something like this, at least for now. And then as we go on, we get a little bit more clearer as to what some of this slang is, and what some of the made up terminology is.
That's a good point. Sometimes it feels like it is slang. It's not like a different language, but it feels like slang, because he uses sort of like real words or similar sounding real words to describe something else, or combines in different ways. He doesn't do like, I don't know, like again, like a fancy book, like a Tolkien, he doesn't invent completely new word in different language. A lot of the time, he just takes existing words and slightly changes them, put them together. So you can vaguely understand what it can kind of mean without fully, right?
And I couldn't imagine, like, because just think about how much language has changed just from the 20th century, from the 19th century. And I couldn't imagine trying to think of what language would be like thousands of years in the however years in the future this is, and how slang would develop, and how people would call different things. So it's incredible that he actually is able to get out what he does get out, and still allow us to understand it somewhat.
Yeah, and for instance, like when we hear the term immerser, you like, I was wondering, what is she going to immerse herself in? Which I suppose she is in the immer, but immerser is also from the root, apparently, is immer, right? So there's some of these I guess misdirections. I don't know if I'd go so far as to call them that, but like use of words that we already know in different ways, like Dan was saying earlier. I think that was pretty interesting. And like, you have to not just wait to have a term to understand what a word you means later on. You also have to readjust your expectations or like assumptions that you may have made as you went along. And also, I think some of the words that are just English, that aren't words that I know, I feel like are world building words. But there was one German word I realized. So manchmal field, the sometimes field, that means sometimes in German, apparently. So I when words feel made up, I sometimes looked them up, and it turned out they were real words that meant something. So that was interesting too.
You're right. Sometimes I'm wondering, like, is this a word that in English that I don't know, or did he make it up? I feel he uses quite, how do I say it? Not common words sometimes.
Yeah. like trids, for instance, based on the explanation, they seem like 3-dimensional video things, right? So is trid short for tri-dimensional? I don't know, but
Hmm.
it's it's cool though. It's fun to try and figure it out as we go along.
Yeah. But it does take, like you were saying, it does take a bit to get into it. And I also found myself that it's hard for me to just like, it would be hard for me to read all of this in one chunk.
Yeah.
It would be too much for a brain, and it's like, it just lead short bits. And then I found myself sometimes like stopping, and I'm like, oh, that's an interesting thing. Let me think a bit about it, like what it might mean. Does it these cultural practices in the future? Like it's like you just stop, you think a bit, you look out of the window or something. But it's not something to be rushed through, I guess.
Hmm.
There's also the way the kids are raised in Embassytown with the group setting. I remember there is a similar thing in one of Becky Chambers' books that was interesting. Well, I guess it's a species that we meet through all 4 books, so I guess it's in all 4 books of her series. But that's very interesting too, the communal raising of a child, and they don't have attachment to any single parent. And I'm guessing that's probably going to be the source of conflict. Maybe not, because apparently whatever happened with Calvin is the source of conflict between our main character and her husband eventually. But yeah, that's interesting how they are raised, just presenting different structures of society and sort of breaking our assumptions about like this needs to be this way. I think that's something that I've only read 2 books, but I feel like this author's really good at doing.
Challenging your preconceptions, or like one thing I was wondering is, maybe I missed the parts, but is like the protagonist a human? Do we have any confirmation at any point? I was trying to remember before coming to the discussion.
I was fairly certain that she was, except when we got to the part about how they couldn't have a physical relationship, she and her husband. But I was like, is one of them not
Yeah.
human, or like what's up there? But
I
sorry,
did wonder about that. You're right.
That's curious, because I assumed she was, but of course, we probably shouldn't make assumptions with this guy's writing. So, that's for now. I'm gonna say she is, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
But have we had any descriptions of them, like the number of limbs, all those things? I couldn't remember, but maybe I just glossed by them. But
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Well, I think she did describe her husband as handsome and stuff, and but I don't remember specifically. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I do remember seeing human mention about someone. I don't remember where. Let me search.
I mean, there's mention of Terra, which I assume is Earth.
Earth,
And also some guy who, I forget what the joke was, but some guy who said something about Earth. And
he was counting the hours, I think.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
The years.
Oh yes, that's right.
Earth years. Like, that's so
Earth years,
stupid. You're so. Why are you doing? You've never been there.
Yeah.
That was also fun, like calculating everything in kilo hours.
Yeah.
Yes, mega hours and stuff.
Yeah, and like
Which
one of the
makes sense.
languages, Anglo-Ubic, so that's a reference definitely. So
there's some language. There's like Pan-Arabic and other that mentioned. But I don't know.
Did anyone else freak out at the opening of the, I don't know, 2nd chapter or something, when she's like, I got married when I was 11 years old? And I was like, what? I know, I think it was 7. 7 years old. And then it's reckoning by Embassytown years. And I think she was 21 Earth years or something, which is still young. But
Yeah. So it is very interesting. It is very fun. I like all these things. That's why I like him. I just like all of these peculiarities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
And I saw Melville had a little nod to a science fiction classic in here when her husband was reading passages from Flatland, which
Oh,
is a classic book by Edwin Abbott from the 19th century,
I didn't know that.
where it's basically about a two-dimensional space. The book is.
Oh, it's that one. Okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
so
good.
and he mentioned that he was reading that book because he's looking for epigraphs for his own work, and I thought that was a nice little nod to a classic sci-fi book he had in there. And I was just wondering if there's any others in this book that he might throw a bone, but
And also sort of referencing the sci-fi classic The Expanse series with the multi-parent lineage of James Holden. James Holden comes from this universe. That's what I'm saying. Everything's going to be explained about that rather peculiarity. He comes from a communal group of fathers and mothers. He has 7 parents, I think, in that story as well. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you guys think about the ambassadors? I thought that was another. I mean, it follows from the interesting aspects of the host languages, but the ambassadors also I thought were incredibly clever.
It was so fun, and the names have
Yes.
Yeah.
that was very clever, and how it's written with the line in between.
Yeah.
It's very, very
But-
clever.
When I first got the book and I was just flipping through the pages as I do, Chris.
Well, you can tell us what happened in the last page shortly, but
just flipping through, I saw these words written this way, and I was like, those look too much like math equations.
I did think it was really clever though when I noticed that what they'd done obviously with the capitalization of the two people, and I was like, that's as if I discovered that. I mean, it's completely written that way as if I'm an idiot or something. But I was like, Magra, Ezra, right? I get it.
It starts out with a lot of obfuscation too, right? Because I forget the name of the first person who comes to talk to her with that capitalized name, and when they speak, she says A or B, and we're unsure about why. But then you start to understand maybe there's 2 people here, and then you understand why there are always 2 people. Yeah.
I wonder if
Sorry,
we're
go
gonna get more into the creation of the ambassadors, because we got the little origin story there where just 2 guys happen to say something at the same time, and it had a reaction with the aliens, the hosts, and so you kind of got the point that they wanted to replicate that, and they wanted a better means of replicating that interaction, and but yeah, he didn't get really deep into what they went through to create the ambassadors. And of course we know that the new ambassador is a little different as well. So I mean, I'm sure that I'm guessing that's going to be part of the story going forward here, but that's really interesting. We've only just been given just the slightest hint of those guys.
But I thought it was really interesting how you went ahead and discussed that. It wasn't the fact that 2 things were just spoken at the same time. They had to come from the same host, and that meant you could communicate with the hosts, but also how the hosts actually interpret their language even separately from what the ambassadors do, because theirs has meaning. It carries absolute meaning rather than just like a suggestion or communication method. So while the ambassadors are certainly doing the being able to communicate part with, they are also able to lie and stuff in a way that the hosts are not. And actually, I sort of feel like I can smell what's coming from that very setup of just that small bit that was in there, and where we end up with our cliffhanger, obviously, even though it's a very light cliffhanger.
I think she does also say they don't know why the host can understand them, because the host in their language implies that one person has to say both of them. It's one mind, And while they know that it's two different people because they can see that they're saying it. So why can they understand that? Like, if he says they don't really understand why. Which is also interesting. But how do they know that words are spoken with intent? Is also a big mystery. Like, how would you know?
Yeah, they read brain waves or something. I don't know. They seem to be able to manipulate biology a lot. Sorry.
Well, there is that idea that they've been probing at this with the scientific method in terms of testing it, backwards and forwards to see what works. But that also, again, is never explained what their intention was to do it. I mean, we assume because I think through Avice's husband, he is doing it for purely academic reasons, in terms of studying the language. So we assume that the whole principle of the ambassadors is to do with academic pursuit and for communication.
Well,
but again, that's an assumption.
No, not completely.
We've been
No, they
told,
had
yeah.
they mentioned a lot about trade.
Well, they do the bow stuff as well. They need that off the other people.
Yeah.
But and you could say that was because they needed just to communicate with them. But again, that is, I don't think, necessarily true at this stage. I think typical humanity says that they're actually going to do something different.
I think in the beginning they said that they thought the host world had a lot more, I think, gold or something and other material resources, but it turns out it doesn't. But they found the bio things on the side. Right. So I think they wanted to trade for like the other resources in the beginning.
Basically, the whole Bremen, isn't that the main host land? They have basically built a lot of their society around this biotechnology of some sort, so they're very much reliant on it in terms of their existence and the way they're progressing as a species or as a.
Yeah, I'm always very curious about what's happening in the rest of the world in his books. It's like, okay, well, we have the Bremen, and we get snippets of it. It's like, they're very territorial, sort of like they never abandon any colony, even though they're not successful economically. It's about what's going on with the rest of the world. I wonder.
The cleaved ambassador was really interesting too, which again, when we are told that he's cleaved, it's like, what, did he lose an arm or something? And when we eventually find out that he was half an ambassador, I think that was pretty clever too. What was I saying? And he's interesting, isn't he? I think he's one character that I'm really on the lookout for to find out more about him. I love how he was introduced, and he seems like a really kind person. And I think there's something going on with him, right? They refer to him as something of a rebel. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, he's a character that I am very interested in too.
Yeah, I love the very casual. It sounds weird. The very casual prejudice against him.
Yeah.
By the parents. It just sounded like the sort of thing that people would say in real life about, other people.
Yeah.
But it's something we would be like, why are you being like that? I don't know. I found it very funny and interesting.
Yeah, we don't have anything against him, but we just wish he would live elsewhere and not make himself
it's
visible.
unsightly, I think they say.
Yeah.
And it's it makes you think about what you think about other people in our world. It sounds just as silly, probably.
They what was I going to say about Bren? Oh geez, I forgot. Anyway,
well, is it about the fact that he went to then live basically like a hermit then from the side when he actually goes back and asks after basically everybody? Everybody's kind of moved on or passed on to the next, but especially Bren is now removed from society.
But wait, what do you think is like the one big thing? I guess we still don't know. I assume is what's a simile? I don't know how to pronounce.
That's the question. I think what is, because that's her connection to the host at this point.
I took it quite literally insofar as, again, their language is based on events that happened. So if they're to build a new connection, whatever that Vici did for Bren at that time when they went in, they have converted into a simile, so it's knowledge for them. So while it doesn't seem like Avice knows what she did, they do. Everybody else seems to be aware that it was of some importance and that event. So they basically used that event to kind of build out their language to say in the event of that. So she has become part of their language and their communication.
Oh, maybe.
Right.
In a way that even though she doesn't understand any of it, it's weird that she actually is integrated in that. Her being and her existence is actually part of their language. I think that's part of the really clever part that I see sort of building up here, insofar as people through similes or through actions can actually form part of a civilization.
It'll become part of their language. Yeah, I didn't think about
Yeah.
that. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Because they do say, like, when they say, oh, she is the simile.
Yeah,
right?
she is the simile. Yeah.
So it's like, I wonder. But I wonder what did they do to, like, that's interesting. Because I'm sure they did something, like, physical happened, but we don't know, but it's going to be important, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting because the simile that came out of it didn't sound like it should be painful. It was that a girl ate in a restaurant that in a dining place that no one eats at anymore or something to that effect, right? And why was eating painful? So something happened to her there. So yeah.
I concur.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting. I mean, I've been saying this quite a lot over the past couple of weeks. It's amazing how the amount of books that we've read recently are all bleeding into each other in some ways. Like a lot of the ideas and a lot of the things are in it. Like you obviously brought up "Story of Your Life" from Ted Chiang there a while ago in terms of the language using that. We'd obviously read Battle 17 recently, which was about using language as a weapon and that kind of stuff. And in the same way here, we are not sure what the language is being used for here. We are very much on the fence of actually what is going on with this language, of how it's represented, and especially how it's been built and communicated to us. It's very, as Jared said very nicely earlier on, it feels very alien. You know, it feels otherworldly in a way that we are not meant to recognize it as human or as something it's something else is going on.
Yeah. To me, it feels very, like, his works feel very refreshing, as in when I can read that, I know that I haven't read anything like that, right? It feels very original, very like, a lot of the time reading other books are like, oh, you know, I can recall this from this other book, or this is this trope or that other trope. Well, here it just feels very original, which I do like.
Yeah.
After reading a lot of books, at some point you start being like, oh, I want something new.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I really enjoyed Poseidonia Street Station, but 100 pages in, I think I already love this a bit more. I think just because of the whole, I don't know, I'm silly like that. There are certain world building aspects that are really speaking to me. The Immer and the three universes. Like when she says casually that, how the hell did they know this, first of all? Like one of you pointed out earlier, but the first universe had light travel twice at the speed of our universe. And there was one other mention of this universe. And I was like, they mean this universe as in like this instantiation of universe is not just, like our universe. They're not using this that way, in the way we might, which is interesting. But
You sure it's just not recency bias, Fasha?
no, I don't
Okay.
remember loving
All right.
Poseidonia Street Station this
Oh,
much
really?
within the first 100 pages. I did love it, but within the first 100 pages, this just feels clever. That felt interesting and imaginative, but this also feels clever, if that makes sense.
If we have learned anything, it's that Varsha has blanked out her whole Poseidonia Street Station reading experience because Jared has never even read it.
For me, Poseidonia Street Station is still a bit more interesting because I love the griminess and the horror and the grotesque things. Maybe we're gonna see more grotesque things here with weird aliens and stuff. I don't know if the hosts are a bit weird. Like that part with the where they had their ancestors attached to them when they become too old, and they used to use them as nutrients, but now it's seen as like, oh, it's not civilized, but you still keep them with you because they're dead, but they're still there. That one was a bit creepy.
I
like that.
It was. Yeah, I think it doesn't. I don't want to say, okay, this is maybe not the right word, but indulge in the grotesquerie quite as much, I don't think.
Mm.
For
Yes.
instance, there's just a casual mention of the fact that a lot of the biorigging is created from throats, which, if you think about it, or if the description had been detailed, it feels grotesque to think about. But just as a casual mention, you can almost brush past it. I feel like if this was Parido Street Station, we would have had maybe a couple of paragraphs on that. So,
Yeah, for sure.
so one other thing to chat about is her friend, her robot friend.
Mm.
That's, again, I think it's really interesting how he's woven in themes, and I feel like maybe he does this in general, but he's woven in themes about, like the identity of the automaton, whether she belongs to anyone, the respect to her, whether she's really sentient or not, which I guess the fact that the host cannot understand her means that maybe she's not, by whatever definition of sentience they're using to declare that hosts only understand minds behind the speaker. I think all of that is very interesting. And I just love the friendship between her and our main character. Avicii, is it? What's her name? Yeah, Avicii.
Most people seem to call it Avis, but I
Avis.
sort of I think Avicii sounds better in my head when I because I actually had real problems identifying her as a female in the first part of the story. I sort of kept forgetting that she was female. So I kind of thought it was a single sex relationship and stuff at the start, and I went, okay, that's a part of the story, but obviously that's not true.
Yeah.
So not
I
that
guess-
it excludes it.
I guess it becomes clear when they make her a simile, right?
Yes.
And we're told it's the girl in the restaurant. So
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
they-
I mean, she did have some. Wait, wasn't the first person she married a woman or something?
yeah.
She did
Think-
once,
I
yeah.
think so,
Yeah. But
Yeah, I think they mentioned it's like, oh, it's slightly unseemly here.
yeah.
But, it's fine. It just,
Yeah. And so that robot is really cool too. And yeah, and also the aioli breath. Apparently the dome
Mm.
is kept, the life support is kept alive by live creatures, which is like their masks are made of these aioli creatures, which is nice because they won't run out unless the creatures die. I was thinking about this. What if they die while you're inside? Do you carry spares?
I'm sure they have, they have some solution.
Spurs.
So
Oh dear.
yeah. I do think the main story will be around Ezra because the opening paragraph, apparently she was intrigued enough by that to stay behind and not leave, even though she desperately wants to.
Yeah.
When she found out that they're coming. So yeah, this will be interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
I wonder what do you think is the thing that at the end of the section is like, oh, everything changed then. What we didn't notice. What was it? I don't know. I'm trying to think what could it have been. But...
Did they finally understand more, or
That
the
there's different people?
reaction of the host. It was the reaction of the host that nobody noticed at the time.
Maybe they thought the two clones were still, they had like one mind or something. But maybe when there's two different people, they're like, I don't know, something changes. I wonder. Maybe some fundamental, they're like, oh shit, we were misunderstanding our language or something. I don't know. It's very ominous. So
yeah, it's because it's funny because they were busy listening to them speak, engaging their abilities, and they didn't notice everything change. What exactly changed? If you're sitting there looking at something and listening to it, and trying to gauge their abilities, like what would change that you wouldn't notice at the time?
I have a theory.
Ooh.
I always have a theory.
You do.
Always have a theory, right? So as we know, these theories are often horribly wrong, but they're fun, right? So I think where this is going is that you could think of it as hypnotism, but it's not. It's actually controlling. They have worked out a way, Ezra has worked out a way to control the hosts through intention, because they can't lie. So in the communication, they were sort of only communicating words, but if they found out a way to communicate intention and the hosts are hearing this and doing it, they could also be thought of as commands to them. And
Interesting.
this could be a subjugation of the hosts. Again, if they subjugate the hosts, then their technology becomes theirs. Everything about their society becomes then if they subjugate them. So when they spoke
Mm.
the words, the thing that could have changed with the hosts is that the hosts became almost under their control and under whim of whatever
I mean,
it
there
is.
is something to that in the sense that they do wonder, why did they send these two? Why are they still testing? Why did Bremen put this much effort into something which already has a solution?
Yes.
Right, so it does fit with that.
They sort of reinvent the wheel, and somewhat they had a solution. They were growing these ambassadors, so to speak, and they have sort of played with the formula a little bit for some reason.
I'm sure there is something different, that they put some secret plan or whatever that.
I've read enough novels to know that humanity, at the end of the heart of it all, is nefarious. Like, it doesn't just accept things and it doesn't go in peace. It goes to subjugate wherever that it can, especially if it has a resource that it wants. It will harvest that resource as best that it can, and the best way to do it is to control it or to put it under its will.
Fair enough.
There's my theory.
That's as good a theory as any. I had no clue. I don't know. I guess the only thought I have is that, so we have all these, the hosts still don't fully understand the ambassadors, it seems like. So maybe they understand them more. Maybe they finally understand the humans and they don't like what they see.
That's true.
That is a vague theory that I have. But
I was thinking maybe the host understood something about their language or psyche, and that it was going to cause like a collapse of their civilization or something, some inner crisis. That's what I was thinking.
Ooh, and if they did, if Chris's theory is true, and what you said, Dan, then they read intention, right? More than the words of what people say. So they brought the intention with them of subjugation, and that's what the host read.
Yeah, quite possible.
Maybe.
Yeah, they say that. Yeah, putting two things together, because I feel like the game of lies that they were playing was them sort of testing this theory out to see, it was done playfully, as far as the reader goes. But again, it's that idea, right? If we can make them lie just with colors and stuff, what effect they were reading the reactions and stuff at that stage to kind of say, right, because this is just about, can we make them believe that the red is blue? Can we make them believe that the green is black? All of that kind of stuff. Because if they can do that by communication of the language, then actually they can make them do anything, if that was the case.
And I'm cheating just a little bit. I won't tell you how for spoiler reasons, but I think
we know.
But I won't give you details.
Yes,
I won't tell you what part I peeked at. but the hosts, they react as if they are drunk when they are told lies and they are trying to interpret
that's right.
them, which is interesting, their reaction. So bringing it all together, the control, the subjugation, the telling the lies to the host, and thereby bringing them to an intoxicated-ish state, therefore making them somewhat lesser. Maybe that's some direction of where this is headed.
You're a monster, Varsha.
Oh.
Oh dear.
Sometimes I wish I could get drunk off of words.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what they're doing. That is so clever. I didn't think of it like that, but that's what the hosts are doing.
I need beer. Beer and words, though, combined together can be quite effective. Yeah. So yeah, a lot set up and a lot of kind of possibilities, I think, with the world that these created here. Like, we don't know if it's going to go down that path or another path. The technology, the Emmer, all of that kind of stuff is all sort of up for play at the moment. But I suspect the next little section will tell us quite a bit.
Yeah, but I'm definitely enjoying it a lot, and don't know. He's definitely for me my top 10 of my favorite writers.
Right.
I just
Nice.
he scratches an itch I have, I guess.
No, I love this book too. I also thought the Immer monster that comes out of the when they don't wipe the Miabs. What were those boxes that come in the shipments? That was pretty clever. And again, like I love the way that things are eventually explained, right? First we started with Immer's not wiped clean from the boxes. So like, okay, why is that necessary or important? Then a monster shows up out of that. And then and then we're finally told what Immer is. That's all really well done.
Do you think the Immer and the fact that she's an immerser is gonna be a fundamental part of the story, or is it just background?
Yes. I have no idea.
I would suspect that the Immer and the simile are somehow related.
Mm,
Oh, yeah, there we go.
good point. Good point.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because all those events happened not that long after those events in the big scheme of things, as it seemed,
Nice. I have another theory that I have on basis of nothing whatsoever, but
Good.
I feel like these creatures, the hosts, have been around through all three universes.
Oh.
That would be interesting.
I don't know why I think
Okay.
that, but something triggered the thought as I was reading it. But
Wishful thinking?
Well,
I guess
I'll add something to that, because they, in some ways, both technologically with the bio stuff, but in how they communicate, feel like a more evolved version of civilization, don't they? They do, and usually that happens by living longer. Like that's just how civilization maps and ages. So, there definitely could be something within that, I think.
Yeah. And how do you back that up there, Chris? What kind of scientific evidence we bring into the table for that?
Lex winning this.
I'll write my paper and come back to you. I'll publish it next week.
I think it was when
Started to sweat. Justify theories. That's such a all the fun out of theorizing.
is when her husband says that their language is impossible, right?
Yeah.
That. Do you think? Yeah. Anyway, I guess that's probably where the thought came from, but I don't know. Wishful thinking seems to be a good reasoning for it.
For me, I just have a big fat wait and see sticker putting on this thing because I have no idea what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
This whole book for now gives me a big, feels a bit like the Perdido Street Station section about the Garuda and the choice theft.
Yeah.
Like that sort of feeling of using words and language and society. It feels a bit like, I don't know, not exactly, but it sort of feels like it's exploring similar grounds as that sort of section.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because that's one of my favorite parts of the book. This means nothing to Chris, but
But importantly, Varsha nodded her head, acknowledging that she remembers that part of the book, therefore remembering that she read that book. That's good.
I did, yeah, but maybe I was just nodding along to look like I read this.
Convinced. I was convinced.
Fair enough. So now I know that's what it'll do. So next time
you just read the synopsis of the story and you're like, yes, that's all I do.
It's like Varsha nodding and in brackets underneath, she doesn't understand what's
no clue.
No clue.
It's like one of those, like those TikTok videos that say, guess the person who's actually singing. In this case, guess the person that's actually read the book.
Now I will show that I have read it. So to your point, I do. Yeah, I see what you mean. And what I like about that is that you could map something that is in an almost completely alien society still to crimes that humans do, right? So I think, yeah, there might be something here that could map nicely to human civilization. Like,
Yeah.
I love, yeah, I think this, a lot of fantasy and sci-fi that I like does this really well, where they discuss human problems without talking about human problems. And I think the choice theft was an excellent
Yeah.
thing in that regard. But yeah, we'll see.
But the interesting part is not if it's not the issue is not sort of it's a bit what the issue is in our society, but the root is different.
Yeah.
Right. So I wonder here what the root of things is. 'Cause I'm sure there's something that's like the central thing around which the language and their, I guess, brain works.
Yeah. And there's really two parts to why they cannot. Oh, was the whole explanation for why they cannot lie that they read intentions, so you can never hide intentions, and that's why they cannot lie? Or was there more to it than that? I forget.
So yeah, when they're communicating, they communicate a fact or a thing that has happened.
Yes.
So if they see green and they want to say red, they can't because the thing actually is green.
Hmm.
Yeah. I like to understand it, like the language is their thinking. Sort of. That's how I sort of conceptualize it.
Yeah. I like
Makes
But
sense.
they cannot really think in a way different than language, I guess.
Yeah. They don't have
I don't know
free
why.
thought in the same way. Like we can sort of formulate thought and say something completely different. We can think something and speak something differently. They don't seem to be able to.
Yeah.
in the
It's like
same way.
somehow the meaning or the thinking is inside the word spoken. I don't know how,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's like it
Hmm.
lives in there in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah. Cool.
Anyways,
Yeah.
Yep.
I need to go.
There you go. Our
Right.
10 minutes is up.
I'm sorry. Okay. Well, looking forward to discussing it next time and seeing if
Very
we
much
can
so.
figure out more about what's going on. Probably a bit more, but not all of it, I'm sure.
No.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
Good.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
See you.
I did.
Bye.
It just brings back the idea that science fiction is a lot of fun. Like this kind of speculation and stuff, even though like and what sometimes a challenging read in terms of trying to follow and kind of have faith with it, it still creates an awful lot of possibilities and a lot of ideas in it, regardless of how entertaining the story is at this point.
Yeah. In Stephen Erickson's Rejoice, which I guess Jared has read, the people that are chosen, so to speak, to deal with first contact are science fiction writers, which makes sense because they are the most imaginative people on the planet, apparently. Which I mean, I sort of bought into the idea when I read it, but as we have been making our way through more of these short stories and more of these stories, I'm like, I see what you mean. I get it now.
I hadn't really thought that this is a sort of first contact novel insofar as like there has been established relations here for a while here, but it is still very much about understanding another culture and another language and another way of thinking, etc. So I haven't thought about that being necessarily the genre of this, but that definitely fits.
It really, I think, in that sense, echoes Story of Your Life even more because I expect at least part of this will continue on to cover how they understand the language even more, which is what the Story of Your Life was about. A very significant part of it was. I think in that sense, it might have parallels with that story as we go on. The difference is that this is an established relationship. Like, is this an alien that they already have an established relationship with that they may need to rework? But in the other story, they're trying to start a relationship. So, yeah. Fun. We are 50 seconds away from hitting 1 hour. No, I'm just kidding. But Steve, we haven't heard from you. Do you have any bits that you liked? Any bits that maybe not so much?
Well, it's funny hearing you all talk about how you read it in chunks, and I should have done that because I was trying to get it all in one day. and I read it all on Wednesday. So I was trying to catch up and be ready for the discussion, and then by the time I was done, I looked back and my brain felt like it was melted. So it was one of those things where I kind of felt like I was reading Malazan again, and I should have taken it slower. So this week I'll be sure and take it slower. But I was hoping to kind of fill in the blanks with all of you because a lot of it I was a little bit confused on. So yeah, I felt like I understood what was, but I kind of, wasn't really sure where it was going or what. Yeah, so I was more just listening because I had like a headache after I was done. But I'd learned my lesson. I will take it in chunks this week for sure.
And Jared, I have a question for you. So this book came on your radar because of your book think episode with Angela. So far, has it lived up to what you were told about it? Did you have any expectations going in, and what changed as you read?
Yeah, our friend Angela. This is like one of her favorites of all time, and that's why she picked to talk about it. And so far, so good. I am not I like Perdido Street Station a lot, but I wouldn't put it on one of my top 10s. I think it's very good, and so I'm hoping that this one can maybe surpass that. But so far, it's doing very well. But we don't have enough yet really to give it any kind of, I don't know. I definitely need more to find out. And just like Perdido, it's very interesting. It's very well done. He's a good writer. He even the words that weren't made up were very. He has a good mastery of language in general, and so I enjoy that, and so that appeals to me, and so I'm gonna keep reading, and I hope the thing with Perdido was sometimes the weirdness got in the way of the story. That's how I felt at certain points, and so I'm hoping that doesn't repeat itself here.
Yeah.
And either way, it's extremely interesting, and it's really it's really cool stuff. So minor nitpicks, really, just minor nitpicks.
Very nice. Yeah, I like that. Cool. Are we ready to move on to the short story?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the short story that we're going to be discussing is The Fate of Poseidonia, and Jared has entitled himself the Professor of Martian Studies. I feel like we should announce that on every episode because it's really cool, the name you come up with each week. So, yeah, I really enjoyed the story. And I was trying to think of what it reminded me of, the style in which it was told. And the closest I could come was Poor Things, which I guess is also written in some old school style. I don't know quite what, but I feel like overall I got this impression that like things moved really fast and conclusions were drawn really quickly. And anyway, what did you all think of the short story? Okay.
Go ahead, Steve. Come on, give it to us.
All right. Well, okay. I guess I'll be the Debbie Downer. This was a rough one for me. I didn't think it was very. Look, I'm not a writer. I'm not like, don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. But it felt not very well written. It just felt there was a lot of. I felt like it kind of jumped everywhere, and it was mostly just someone sitting around and watching. I thought the premise was really interesting. I thought it was like a cool idea to play with, and I enjoyed the beginning and the end. But the middle felt, I don't know, it just felt kind of goofy. It was kind of a rough one to get through. I felt like if it would have been, I know I feel like I say this when a short story is not like 2 pages long. I always say this, but if it would have been tightened up a little bit, and if it would have been, kind of edited a little bit more and and cut and primmed, I think it would have been much better. It wasn't bad. I didn't hate it or anything. I just felt like, well, I mean, I didn't hate it. It was kind of a slog. I like the idea though. I think it's a really neat idea, but execution wasn't on point for me.
Interesting.
That sounds similar. Where did I hear that before?
I don't know. Does sound
Stories of
deja
your
vu.
life, maybe.
Yeah.
All the stories.
Maybe. It was better than all but one. So let me say this. This story was better than all but one story from Ted Chiang's collection.
Wow.
So I didn't hate it. It was fine. It was fine. I don't it sounds negative, but it was okay. It was fine.
Clare Winger Harris, better author than Ted Chiang, confirmed. There you go.
How's that for a blurb? Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. You can turn it around and say, if you like Ted Chiang, you're gonna love this.
Don't say that.
What about you, Jared?
What about me? The first moment I laid eyes on Martel, I knew he was a Martian. No. It's
It was the
That's
feathers
the,
in his head, wasn't it?
yeah. That was the first line of the story was, he took a great dislike to the man. So once again, the author's telling us that he's not going to like this guy.
Yeah.
And for whatever reasons, we might not like that guy either. And he tells us that his antagonism, he thinks that his antagonism was passive, which means he really doesn't know. But it still concerned him and forced activity on his side. So that's kind of the first paragraph that we get out of the story, and it's kind of the immediate setup for a short story that went on. When it did go on a little long, I think, for that simple premise that was originally stated. It is funny that I love it though when a character like this, an intelligent sounding character who seems to have his stuff together, all of a sudden gets thrown into the institution and is basically Cassandra, shouting to the world that the world's going to end or what have you, and nobody's listening, and I always find that amusing and fascinating when people do that in stories, but then it kind of felt with the whole device thing there that he was playing with at that point, I don't know, it kind of felt reminded me of some Alan Moore stories, basically. There's this weird stuff that you can suddenly have as a device. You're looking at another planet, or you're looking it's other things going on depending on what level you pull or whatever. and so it got a little quirky at that point, and it was fun. And the ending was kind of it was okay.
Cool. It read a little bit. It has a flavor. It's not in story terms of something like the Midwich Cuckoos of the kind of the alien invaders kind of come down by John Wyndham. For me, it read very like a pulp sci-fi novel from the 50s, from around that. Even though this was 27, as it turned out. So I think when you're saying, Steve, you didn't like the writing, I mean, it's no real great literary chops to it. Like it's not like some of the previous stories that we've had over the past couple of weeks with sort of, flowery language. This is very straightforward, scene to scene to scene to scene parts of it. But it sort of seems like a take on the general xenophobia that would have been going around at the time of other people want to steal our resources, and we can't give them to them. This will be the ruinization of us all. Fast forward to now, when if somebody stole a bit of our water, people be going, thank God. I mean, that means New York's going to make it another 100 years. You know what I mean? In some ways, but that idea, like, it's sort of painted the story is painted that the bad guys won, i.e., the Martians won, insofar as they got away with stealing all our water and our ships, but they needed it. And what was the real bad effect for Earth? There really wasn't any, but there was that idea of having the hold and kind of say protect what we have, and the aliens or the foreigners are coming to take our resources and having to steal it because it was sort of theorized. I mean, Martel says it in the lecture. Well, what do you think the Martians would have to do in the case where that was going to happen? Their existence was threatened, and I says, "Oh, I don't know. I can only postulate, but who knows what they would do?" I mean, like in previous stories, there is one sort of conclusion is they'll try and get the water by another means. If it means the end of their sort of civilization in some ways, then they're going to try at the very least to do it. And if they're not being given it, they're going to take it in some way. So I think a lot of it was interesting from that point of view. The kind of eyes that we see the story through, I don't think are particularly interesting because it sort of devolves into he's got my woman and I like that woman and therefore I don't like him because I like her, rather than the fate of Earth or some bad thing against Earth. It sort of obfuscates, the problem with it in some ways. And even by the very end of the story, he's much more put out by the fact that even when she was dead, he sort of felt sorry for it and that he couldn't save her. But then he finds out that she's alive, and it's like, oh, he got the girl. It was very, he was not a very likable character to root for in the first place. In some ways, you were sort of like, leave him in jail. Just throw away the keys. Take her.
Yeah, one thing that did pop into my head at the end of the story was I thought, was this actually just all in his head from the institution? Because he says at the end, although many doubt the truth of my solution to the mystery. And so we got to remember it's first person, it's his story. So did this all really happen? Basically, I was kind of wondering that a little bit at the end.
I think to that point, or maybe slightly parallel to it, the story, I enjoyed it and it read pretty quickly to me because it felt goofy. Like our main character is a bit of an ass and the story wasn't taking itself too seriously. And the whole time, I think we knew what was going on. We knew, but the main character didn't. And I think that was intentional. I don't think the author was trying to reveal to us that these guys are Martians and they're stealing our water. I think to what Jared said, the first time we meet the guy, we know he's at a lecture on Martians and he's got weird spongy hands. So I think we're meant to know all along that we're dealing with a Martian here. And I didn't see the xenophobia, but I think that's a great point. I guess that's probably that seems right. That they're stealing our resources, and immediately just from looking at him, he's like, yeah, I don't like this guy because he's done nothing to earn his antagonism. So when the story starts out, for some reason, I think because of the preface to the story, I thought that the main character was female. The first person narrator was female.
Yes, she is.
Yeah.
Turns out, she is. I misspoke there. Yes, she is female.
No, the main character is male. That was, I think
male.
that was a typo in the introduction there because, like you said, he's pining after a woman,
right? Yeah. And he's introduced as Mr. Gregory or something.
That's right. Gregory. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I went back and read the preface again. So I started reading it as female perspective and then switched to male. But then there's just a ever so slight female thing there, which, I mean, I'm calling it female because I feel like authors of 1927 wouldn't maybe necessarily write this about their main male characters, in that when he saw the creepy eyes of the Martian, he wanted to scream and grab at him or something. That sounds a bit female characteristic. Anyway, apart from all of that, so when I started reading it, I thought that this was going to devolve into some big enmity and whatnot, but we find out that he hates the guy just for how he looks, and then sure, later on he's courting the same girl as he is, but just it starts over nothing. That and the fact that he has phosphorescent eyes apparently. So yeah, I really like the xenophobia interpretation. I also didn't like the preface. I didn't see it once again, the themes that they said about fear of technology and one other thing. Was it?
So the preface is fascinating actually, because this was written by a woman, right?
Mm,
Written by Clare Winger Harris. So I'm going to read this bit because it's kind of mind blowing, right? So this was first published in Amazing Stories magazine in 1927 and was the first story ever published by a female author in Amazing Stories, right? And the editor at the time of Amazing Stories, Hugo Gernsback, wrote in his introduction to the story this: that the third it got third prize in a contest actually to be published in Amazing Stories. That the third place winner should prove to be a woman was one of the surprises of the contest. For as a rule, women do not make good scientific fiction writers because their education and general tendencies on scientific matters are usually limited. But the exception, as always, proves the rule. The exception in this case being extraordinarily impressive. So the fact that this was published at all and that sort of had to be prefaced by saying, I can't believe this was written by a woman. Look how smart this is. In some ways, is frankly, given modern eyes 100 years later, kind of amazing in some ways, especially given the plethora of really important and how important female writers have been in speculative fiction in total. You know, some of them we know well, and some of them we'd probably get to in while, but they have been phenomenally important in sort of moving the genre forward. Apart from, like, I think if it was left to men, I think science fiction and fantasy as a genre would still be incredibly narrow in terms of the field of view that it'd be looking at. So yeah, I think I found that sort of fascinating.
Well, just think the courage it took to, because it mentions that she's the first to write under her real, quote unquote, her real name. So you wonder how many other women had published stories under a pseudonym or a pen name and no one knew. Yeah. But for her to use her real name, knowing that she would get something that kind of, she's a woman and that's why it's like, they're lesser than or whatever. But just the courage it must have taken to put herself out there like that. That's something that should be celebrated.
Steve didn't like it. Just putting it.
I've trashed on lots of stories in this pod. I've trashed the whole book of Ted Chiang. All the ones. So she's doing pretty good. It was fine. Yeah.
I apologize.
But I do really think that one of the things I like most about just the premise is about Mars, and I think Mars, it looks like a used planet. Like you look at it, it looks like it's been used. It looks like it was like, somebody was there and it looks like someone discarded it. Like so I think that's really interesting that Mars just looks like someone had, abandoned it. So I like that, the idea of they're trying to get resources from us. They could have just asked,
Yeah. Stole the water. Overnight too. Pretty advanced tech.
I was going to say pretty advanced because the ships fly up in the sky and then end up on Mars. I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah. And I like how I complain about this in the previous story too. She's like, yeah, it's really sad that my family died, but I'm gonna find a way to move on and live.
Yeah. But I got my man and I get to live with them on Mars and we got water, so it all worked out great.
Yeah.
Mom and dad dead, but just the way it goes.
Do you think that was possibly her poking fun at men in a way? That's what's important to them? Could that maybe be a way to kind of shine a mirror back and be like, this is what you'd be worried about when this is where your priorities are? Maybe nobody got the punchline at the time.
Yeah, men would be more worried about, rather than their resources and their water, except that they'd be more worried about the Martians stealing their women and being extra competition. I like that interpretation a lot, Steve. I think that it might be a bit closer to the truth than might be comfortable.
Maybe Claire had the last laugh on that one.
I mean, going back to the main character being a bit of an ass, he says, "Oh, I like that she needed me that when she was calling me in a time of need. Yes. So I'm gonna go."
Yeah. And then he's like, "Oh, call the doctor." He takes off. Just like, okay.
So yeah, I like that he's shown himself
God
to be a bit of an idiot. So Yeah.
I mean, fits with the male psyche quite well. Then, yeah.
So yeah, I guess overall, if we were expecting to read about someone we were supposed to be rooting for, read a story that's supposed to have a big reveal about the Martians and so on, I can see how it didn't do a good job. But I don't think that's true. I think that we were meant to know right from the beginning. I think maybe the main character isn't meant to be liked. So I feel like that stuff is intentional. So it did read well for me. And there were some things that did not appeal to more modern sensibilities I have about storytelling, like, letting, like the thing I just said about my parents just died, but cool, I'll move on. But yeah, also I think the way things were going, how quickly everything was moving, I think, yeah, it sort of even made sense. Like that's the style, I guess, for the story. Things don't make a lot of sense, but the characters do it anyway. Like how he jumps to the conclusion that that he's communicating with the spirit world. Like, you believe that Martians exist, but you go to the spirit world first before Martians. Okay.
Mm.
And also, did you guys like the random, completely unnecessary aside that the year has now been
Oh, yeah.
readjusted to have 28 days in every month? It's like Claire just was annoyed about this, and so she
Yeah.
threw it into the stuff.
Yeah, and it's like New Year's Day is not January 1st; it's New Year's Day.
Yeah. I don't like how the year is structured, so I'm going to change it in my story.
To hell with, cycles of the earth going around the sun and all that kind of stuff. That stuff doesn't matter. We're just going to make every year 28 days.
Yeah.
To be fair, one of my favorite maths lessons actually is about pointing out why the leap year is important. And actually that 0.25 of a day, how much it corrects and keeps the seasons right, etc. Because, how much if we didn't have it, things would be knocked off over a period of a couple of hundred years, and people go, whoa, so that's why that has to happen, etc. And
Yeah.
very, very interesting.
Nice. Do you teach it during fractions or?
I usually do those kind of things as like an introduction, so people notorious are late for class, teach them something, give them something or know that they're going to get something interesting in the first 5 minutes of the class, mathematical, outside of what the lesson is that day, and they'll be on time.
Nice. I like that. Cool. Any other closing thoughts about our Martians? Jared has apparently earned a degree from reading this book.
Oh, I need to know about Martians right there.
Yeah. They need water.
They
And
need
They need more.
they've got feathers instead of hair. I mean,
Oh yeah.
spongy hands.
spongy hands.
I just thought it's funny you mentioned that about feathers, because beginning doesn't the character remark that he's built like a Native American or like an Indian? I wonder if that plays into
he
it.
said the most the swarthy coppery hue of his flesh, which was not unlike that of an American Indian. And
and the headdress and the feathers. I wonder
Yes.
if that's some referencing the so that could be a whole nother take
Yeah.
on it about taking
Absolutely,
resources away. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are some very unsavory language used there too. I think she refers to savage Indians.
Mhm.
So yeah, that one was interesting because there's always this tension of like interpreting something as what a character's saying and maybe the author's commenting on it versus is this the author's opinion. I think in this case it's not super clear, but given that the character is not generally likable, maybe it is the character's opinion only, and especially the possibility of the themes around the what's the word I'm looking for, the opposite of condone.
Endorse.
Condemnation of xenophobia. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I like that. I like what you said, Steve.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I think it's important to read these old stories, even if in 2024 eyes, it is sometimes like a challenge to get through. Like last week, the story we read last week, I think it's important to first to understand when it was written, and it's important to have discussions like this to dissect and talk about it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That's I think they're all very important stories, and they, among some of the other ones that we mentioned here and there too, because it really gives a broader understanding of how our stories evolved and language evolved, and how people use language to interpret, to put out ideas. Because that changes over time, and sometimes when you're reading stuff like Embassytown, it's good to get that historical context from other sources, so that you can get a better understanding of what he's trying to do as an author in something like that, and how he's like if you just read Embassytown in a vacuum, you wouldn't have that context of what is he doing different and what is he doing unique. You would just have that. And so it brings a better richness to all your reading. Totally agree.
We talked about this actually a little in the last SF Masterworks reading, about how even though we've only done like 9 books of that series, how you can see the through lines into so many other stories. Like it is really, even from reading 9 classic books, reading 10, 12, 13 classic SF stories, you kind of see the genesis of all of those ideas. So when people go back and read some of the stuff like we have done and criticize it and say, oh, I didn't like this or what otherwise, but we are not reading them in 1927. We are reading them 100 years later. And actually, if you think of the plethora of sci-fi stories, or if you were to do the same with crime or any other thing, everybody else has been riffing off those ideas for like 100 years. Taking them and molding them and changing them. I think, to its credit, of all the stories that we've got so far, this is by far the most readable. I think in terms of being, very straightforward. It means it doesn't really have an awful lot, maybe, of the depth and ideas some of the other stories have. That could be argued in whatever way, but it definitely was readable. When I seen the size of it, I hadn't read it early, so I thought I'd left myself an hour to read it, and I went, "Oh, I'm gonna have to pull up a late Sickie Varsha thing here, and I'm never going to make it to the end." But I did. I made it through the length of it with plenty of time to spare, as it turned out. But if it had been heavy, I wouldn't have got through it.
Yeah, I also did that. I left it to the end, but I finished it much faster than I thought. I was sure it would take me at least more than an hour, but I think I got through it in about 45 minutes. Sorry, Steve, were you saying something? Yeah.
I was just say we're just going back to how certain stories, influence other stories, and I think Neuromancer is a book that I've thought about revisiting because it's influenced so much, and even it's not only science fiction but pop culture, and so many names that we're familiar with today, like Windows and Microsoft, and I think there's a few others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but there's so many things that came from that one book that influenced so much. So it's amazing how much influence literature can have on not only more literature, but just our everyday.
And across genres too. And it's definitely, because I know I was talking to somebody recently, I forget who it was, but they told me that Gibson Neuromancer, he was actually heavily influenced by the pulp writers, the beat writers of the 50s. And he was trying to do a science fiction beat novel and have that kind of fast-paced but tech talk instead of what they were doing. And so the influences, like from like, because Neuromancer's influenced so much after that, but that was also influenced by something else, and so it just keeps going back like that.
And I think understanding the genesis of stuff and going through it just deepens your appreciation of stories and telling in general, it makes, like you said, like reading Embassytown, not reading Embassytown in a vacuum. It's linked to everything else you've ever read in some ways. We were talking about how we've read a couple of things about language beforehand and why you may not have enjoyed that story at that time, but actually taking that experience and taking it into another book about language actually changes your perception of what that would have been, in its own right. It's all really interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. Another thing I like about this collection is I think someone mentioned it in an earlier discussion, is the fact that they're arranged chronologically. So we can also see what the central themes were of the sci-fi of that time. Like, I think maybe we'll see more stories about Martians possibly in the next few decades. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how the stories evolve over time as well, which I think is really cool for this collection to do. Cool. And
Oh,
sorry.
I just read today that they are casting for a Neuromancer series or film. So
Nice.
Very, very good.
Who's producing it?
I was afraid to look.
Michael Bay.
Lots of explosions.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking forward to Murderbot. That's the other one that Apple is doing
Mm.
that I was interested in.
They are doing lots.
Yes. So with that, we will see everyone next week with the part 2 and part 3 of Embassytown and the Star Stealer, the Comet Stealer, the Star Stealer by Edmund Hamilton.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Did I get that right? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that's the short story we'll be reading next week. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon.